Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Amachean Experiences and Stories panel discussion. I'm getting some weird audio. Is that okay? Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Amachean Experiences and Stories. Okay, seem to have some we're having a little technical difficulties right now. Okay, so sorry about that. So welcome to the Amachean. Hang on. Okay, all right, I'm getting this horrible feedback, so I'm not really sure what's happening. So I'm just trying to check to see what's happening. So my panelists, please hang on. So, okay, so anyhow, my name is John Tonai. My father, Minoru's family was incarcerated at Amachi. So I'm a descendant of Amachi. In this session, I'll be interviewing 4 Amachians regarding the memories about Amachi. Because many of you might have questions of our panelists, please feel free to write them in the chat and I will forward your questions to them. Following the panel discussion, we will be giving updates on what is happening at Amachi, including the exciting developments towards Amachi becoming a new National Historic Site and opportunities to get involved with that. There will also be brief overviews from the Amachi Preservation Society, University of Denver Amachi Project, National Park Service, the National Parks Conservation Association, and the Amachi Historical Society too, with time for a live Q&A. And then concluding today's programming will be special topic discussion groups. These groups will be a small group sessions of the following topics: Amachi artifacts at home, Amachi National Historic Site Bill, Amachi resistors, and recreational activities at camp. If you haven't registered for a session, we'd appreciate if you do so immediately after this panel discussion. So we have 4 Amachians today. The first one I'll talk about is Lily Havey. She was born in Los Angeles and sent to Santa Anita and then Amachi during the war. The family then moved to Salt Lake City, and after high school, Lily pursued a music degree at New England Conservatory of Music in Boston, majoring in piano. She taught English, humanities, and creative writing and sponsored the high school literary magazine for 14 years before she quit when she had her second son, Michael. She developed a stained glass business and had a basement studio in business for another 30 years. In the early 1980s, she heard stories of veterans returning from the Vietnam War with PTSD, and doctors were using art, music, and painting as therapies. She wondered whether her free-floating anxiety was due to her experiences in the concentration camps during World War II. She realized quickly she could not easily express her emotional responses in glass and began watercoloring. Most of these paintings are included in her book, Gasa Gasa Girl Goes to Camp, a Nisei youth behind a World War II fence. The book is about her 4 years at the camps, told from the viewpoint of a preteen maturing into puberty. She enjoyed watercolor and continues to paint scenes of Japan and southern Utah. Her interest in other media expanded. Currently, she has been working in collaboration with her son Michael on projects that include Suru. Our second panelist is Hideo Toto Kagawa. He was born in 1930 in Sawtell, California. His parents were both born in Hawaii, but raised in Japan. Before the war, he lived in Redondo Beach. His parents had a market at 182nd and Hawthorne Boulevard and were quite successful. Toto's family was one of the first families to be sent to Santa Anita. About 9 months later, they were sent to Amachi, where he spent his 7th, 8th, and 9th grades. In 1945, Toto and his family went to live at Seabrook Farms in New Jersey because his parents heard of shootings in California. 2 years later, they returned to California and lived in Pasadena, where he graduated from high school and majored in commercial art at Los Angeles City College. In 1956, shortly after marrying his wife Nancy, Toto and his uncle bought the business Fish King. When his uncle died in 1968, he bought the business from his heirs, and he built Fish King from a 3-man operation to a wholesale and retail business that employs around 85 people. And our final 2 panelists are Mas Takano and his sister Ikuku Takano Takeshita. They're originally from Alameda, California. The Takano family was evacuated from Alameda soon after the bombing of Pearl Harbor because of their proximity to the Alameda Naval Air Station. They left Alameda to stay with friends in the central California city of Cortez in the hopes they would be safe from any additional evacuations. 3 months later, Executive Order 9066 was issued, and the Takano family was forcibly removed to the Merced Assembly Center and then to Amachi. They lived in Block 9E, apartments 7A and 7B. After the war, the Takano family moved back to Alameda, where Cookie eventually worked for the University of California and settled in San Leandro with her husband. So I'd like you all to, I'm going to be asking some questions for everybody, and some of the important things to understand about these questions. I'm going to ask them to each person, and some of the questions will be to everybody in the panel, and some of the questions will be specifically to certain members of the panel. So first, Toto, I've been dying to know when did you get your nickname Toto, and what does that mean? How did you get that name?
Well, in Amachi, since I was from Redondo Beach, there's, I guess the big boys were the guys from Santa Anita and the Seinan district on the west side of Los Angeles. And then there was this guy, Sam Takechi, and he was a pretty burly, big fellow, and I got to know him pretty good. And he was from LA, and I kind of looked up to him, and we used to kid each other a lot. And one day I told Sam, "Hey, there's a picture of you on the front cover of Life magazine, and there was this gorilla called Toto on there." And I says, "Hey, Sam, this is you." And he says, "What are you talking about? It's you, man." And he had more friends than I did, so they all started calling me Toto.
Okay. It's funny because I've known you of you for quite a few years, and actually never knew that story. And this question, well, first we'll go to Lily. So how old were you when you went to reading camp?
I had just turned 10.
Okay. And Mas, how old were you and Cookie?
Well, I was just like Lily. I just turned 10.
Okay. And Cookie, how old were you?
I was 12. And
okay.
I think after we moved, I turned 13.
Okay. And Toto, you mentioned in 7th grade, but how old were you?
No, I was 12 years old.
Okay. So, so Toto had mentioned that his parents had a market before the war. So Lily, what did your parents do?
Well, my father was, he couldn't find a steady job. And so he was a gardener, and my mother went to sewing school and became a seamstress, quite successful.
Oh, okay.
She was just starting to build up her business when the war broke out. It was too bad.
Yeah. So Mas, what did your parents do?
Well, my father was, he was a gardener.
Uh-huh.
He did some landscaping in the beginning because Alameda was just growing up and a new area was being built. So he actually built some gardens in Alameda, but eventually turned into straight into gardening.
Okay.
Talk about him?
Oh, my mother was not well health-wise. She had terrible arthritis, so she wasn't able to work. So my father did, he worked very hard.
Uh-huh.
And then when he did work so hard, he did send us on to school, to college.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well,
but my mother was bedridden, yes.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
So so Lily and Toto, you both went to Santa Anita. Do you have any memories of your what was your life like before you went to Santa Anita?
Before,
Yeah.
one of my big memories, of course, is Japanese school on Saturdays. And we were just barely getting into calligraphy.
Uh-huh.
Loved. And so I've always been sorry that, I couldn't continue with that. But then in the last, I guess, 10 years, I took classes from someone named Mas Hayashi in Salt Lake City, who was a master calligrapher.
Oh, wow. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I took lessons from him for about 3 years.
Okay.
And anyway, so Japanese school was a biggie.
Okay.
I think most of us went to Japanese school, either after school or on Saturdays, and we were a Saturday person. And so there were all these everyday Japanese school people who were, what would you call, more superior? They were faster than with us, of course, than we were. And so we always felt, the Saturday people always felt kind of like we lagged behind.
Oh. So what part of LA were you from?
Hollywood.
Okay. So where was your Japanese school?
In LA somewhere. My mother drove us
Okay.
every Saturday. It wasn't close by.
Uh-huh. Were there a lot of Japanese in the Hollywood area?
My block, there were maybe 5 or 6 families.
Okay. Okay. So Toto, how about you? What do you remember much about before camp?
Before camp?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, Redondo Beach at that time was mainly farmland, and most of them were run by the Japanese. So most of them all stopped at our market, and everyone lived pretty far from each other. So I didn't have too many playmates, and I used to play hopscotch and jacks with my sisters. I have 2 sisters, and like Lily, we all went to a Japanese school every Saturday to Gardena Bukyokai. And Gardena had a lot of Japanese living over there too. So there was a pretty big Japanese community we were right on the beach. Yeah.
Okay. And so for Mas, how about you before you went to camp?
Well, it was like Lily, we were in Japanese school, but we went every day. Every day after school, we had to go to Japanese school. And Saturday school, Saturday? No.
But summertime.
We had to go.
We went.
Yeah.
Even to.
But after the war started, they closed us down, and I didn't get into calligraphy at all. We just said katakana, hiragana. That was about it, But you had a little bit more. Yeah.
Yes. My father said, you have a Japanese face, so you should speak Japanese. So at home, we were required to speak Japanese, and he would correct our Japanese. Everybody else spoke English, and their parents would speak broken English. My father said, rather our parents speaking improper English, we had to speak proper Japanese. We went to Japanese school every day, and during the summer, we went even during summer vacation. And once a week, my father took my sister and me, and there were 2 other families, to a special calligraphy class during the week at night. My father was very much into that. And then he said, rather than his speaking improper English and my mother speaking improper English to us, when we're home, we are to speak Japanese. So without realizing this, we realized later when we got into camp and everything else, Japanese was very fluent. In fact, when we went to Japanese school, they'd have graduation or promotion once a year. My brother would be the smartest in his class. I would be the smartest and my sister. And then that's because we were required to speak Japanese at home. My parents said rather they're speaking improper English, they want us to learn Japanese. They said you can't hide it. You have a Japanese face.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until later years that I really appreciated that. Later years.
Yeah. So, and this question goes to all three of you, or all four of you. So, do you remember arriving at Amachi, and what were your impressions when you arrived?
Writing?
When you arrived at Amachi, what were your impressions? So, Lily, you go ahead first.
Well, this is a chapter in my book, and my mother had told me, "Oh, we're going to go camping," and camping to me meant tents. You know, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts went camping, and they roasted marshmallows over a fire and slept in tents. And so we got to camp, and all these black-haired people, and these guards with guns, and I didn't know what that was all about, and barbed wire. And anyway, so the impression was not very good. And after we got our bedding and we went to our barrack, I said to my parents, I want to go home. You know, I really don't like camping at all. And my mother said, well, you can't go home. And I said, well, why not? You know, and she said, well, this is a special kind of camp. And how do you explain this to a 10-year-old?
Yeah. So what was there a difference to you between Santa Anita and Amachi then?
Oh, yeah. After 3 days on the train and we got off, there was an expanse. The Amachi was full of sky, for one thing. Mm-hmm. Everybody was kind of complaining about, how dreary it all was. But I was rather intrigued by the color because it was gray and green, and that's all. You know, there was all this vegetation around. And one of my very first experiences in camp of lugging our luggage up the hill to 9L, which was the only L block. If, Mas probably knows. Mm-hmm. It was way over on the other side of camp. And there was this building, wooden building, and I wondered what that was. And my brother said, go look. And I thought it was a trick. And so I opened the door, and there's a woman sitting on a slab of wood with 3 holes. And she said, oh, come in. I slammed the door. And it was, of course, a temporary outhouse because they hadn't finished the laundry room and the toilets, the bathrooms at 9L. That was a huge surprise.
Yeah. So for those who are not familiar with Amachi, my family was at 9L also. Normally most of the camps are very rectangular, very regular, but 9L was actually one block that stuck out from all the other ones. So, and it was all the way on the eastern end of the camp. Mm-hmm. So Toto, how about you? Do you remember arriving, and what were your impressions about your arrival?
I don't know. I remember the ride on the train because you had to keep your windows closed going through any town. Mm-hmm. But I remember my mom, she wanted the windows raised when we were going across mountains and whatever. But I remember her nose was all black all the time because of all the soot from the motor, And, when we went into camp, we lived in 6E, and they used to call that 6E sewers because it was a block closest to the sewers, and our barrack was right there, right on the corner. And boy, in the summertime when the wind blew our way, man, it was really pretty bad. But during the winters, the sewers used to freeze over, and people used to ice skate on there. And you just got to be careful of all the little bumps in the ice. And when that cleared away, there used to be wild ducks that came, and they used to swim and go underwater in the sewer. And one day I remember I picked up a rock and I threw it just as it
I think so.
came up,
I don't
hit him on the head and it killed him.
Huh.
know.
But other than that, I think I remember Santa Anita because the Japanese, they were very enterprising. And when we went to Santa Anita, one day we were outside our stables, and kids came running our way, and they says, "Hey, if you go down to the corner, the old guys, they'll give you money for wrestling." And so we all ran down there, and these old, at that time, I guess 40, 50 years old, were really old, but they were drawing a circle in the sand, and they were pairing two kids off, and then they were making them do sumo, and they give us, I don't know, 5 cents or pennies or whatever. But then, 8 months later, I think less than a year later, when we were leaving camp, by that time, they had a huge sumo ring built I think near the racetrack, empty area. And I don't know how they got hold of it, but they had a covering there. They had these referees with the regular Japanese costume, and they got us all a small,
Wow.
canvas thing that we had to wear. Of course, I wore mine over my shorts. But that's how enterprising the Japanese are. They made use of whatever time or material they had, and yeah. But even today, I'm amazed at what they did in the camps.
Okay. Yeah. So,
Artwork too.
Mas, do you have any, and Cookie, do you guys have any, do you remember arriving at Amachi, and what were your impressions?
Well, very quickly, as Lily, we weren't surprised. At least I was when we got to Amache and to Granada, I guess was the town when we got off the train, because for those 3-4 days, we were restricted. We couldn't put the shades down up, and that was supposedly for our safety. They didn't want people taking shots into the train if they knew they were all Japanese in there. So that they said that was for our safety. Whether that was propaganda, I don't know. But when we got there, we had the guards, and it was a rude awakening, with the bayonets and that kind of business, and going into the barracks was disheartening, to say the least. Actually, we only had 7B at the time. There were 5 of us in one room, and that was tough. But anyway, that was my impression of arriving Amachi. Maybe she had a different one. She might have had a different impression.
Well, I was thinking the Japanese are very, what would you say, they're always looking positively. I remember, John, Rumi and I became very good friends. They lived in 9L. She would say to us, that was the only block, one block called 9L. And I said, Rumi, where are you living? She said, Beverly Hills. They called themselves Beverly Hills, and it was the young kids. And we thought, oh, how impressive. They were the only block, one block, 9L, and that's where the Tonais lived. I remember she said, we live in Beverly Hills. And I still remember that. And Rumi and I became very, very good friends. And when we'd have parties, all the girls would have a party, and then you'd have to make a reservation for this one recreation room. And the girls invited their own friends as dates. And the girls would dance with the girls. And I remember Rumi was my date.
Yeah.
She came with her father. Her father was taken by the FBI. I remember that. And we were so worried that my father would, and we escaped at 5 o'clock in the morning. And somebody said, they know where you are. So no matter how far you go or where, they'll find you. So, but where the Tonais live, it was only one block, 9L.
Yeah.
So they said, you live in Beverly Hills. You know, I thought
Okay.
later years, I think this is what survived. The Japanese survived.
Hmm.
It was never always looking down, down, down.
Right.
We
Yeah.
were at the very bottom of the hill. It never started out with ABC. It started with the E.
Yeah.
E, 70, 8E. We were 90. We were the first row at the bottom of the hill. Everything we had to do was go uphill, and there was 9L by itself, Beverly Hills.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you guys were right at the front, towards the front of the camp. So speaking of blocks, so we have Mas and Cookie in 9E. And Lily, you mentioned that you were in 9L. And Toto, what block were you in?
6E.
6E. Okay. So actually, we have an audience question here from Chris and Dan Kubo, and this is to Mas. So the question is, our family, the Kubos, were in 9E as well, if I heard correctly. Do you remember them? Yoshi, Shizuma, Shigemi, Masaya, Haru, Mei, and the parents were Kasaku and Itsu. Do you remember them?
Yeah, they were in our block in 90.
Yeah.
I remember
Okay.
Harume and Masai. I don't remember Yoshi too well, but
Were they from
they were from Cortez. They're from
Were
Cortez,
they
I
from
believe.
Cortez?
Remember all the Cortez people, but the Cortez people basically in 10E,
Yeah,
and the Kubos were in 9E with us.
with
yeah.
us.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Lily, do you remember, like, oh, I guess you probably should, but who were some of your best friends at camp?
Who, me?
Yeah.
My best friends,
Yeah.
I had two. There was one, Grace, and you probably knew the family, Doyce, and Joyce.
Okay. Were they friends before camp and then you stayed
No.
friends, or were they?
Didn't, but Cookie. I knew Ruby, and I actually have a picture of her, a photograph that she gave me when we left camp, and I just still remember how beautiful she was. Right?
So this is a photograph from her in camp?
Rumi, yeah.
Yeah, Rumi?
Photograph of Rumi in camp.
Oh, wow. On a personal side, I'm going to talk to you later because I'd like you to send me a copy if you still have it. We have very few photos of our family in camp.
Well,
So
I don't know. My brother was your dad's best friend.
mhm.
And I don't know whether they have pictures or not.
Tonais were smart.
Okay, and so Toto, did you have any like really close friends in camp?
Oh, yeah. Eugene Moritani. And, it was a thing to have a nickname in camp. Everybody had a nickname, it seemed like. His full name was Eugene Moritani, and he wanted a nickname too. So he took the first two letters and the last two letters and called himself Yumo. So ever since then, I knew him as Yumo. Of course, he passed away a few years back. And this Jim Fujimori was another real good friend, and I still see Jimmy to this day.
Mm.
We have breakfast together, supposedly every Wednesday morning, with a group. So yeah, it's funny the friends you made, like the friends I made in Seabrooks and camp, and in fact Santa Anita. We just knew them for about 2 or 3 years, but they became a lifelong friend, So that's something. I think mainly because we all went through the same experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because my dad mentioned both those men too, quite often. So, Boston.
Look up to your dad. That was a leader.
Yeah. So, Moss and Cookie, how about you? So Cookie, you've already mentioned my Aunt Rumi, but were there any other people?
About
Friends, really good friends.
things. Well, we had the girls were very cliquish. We had two clubs. It was called the Juniorettes because we lived at the bottom, and we came from Merced Assembly Center, and then Juniorettes and We Teeners, WEE, We Teeners, and we did everything together. We were interested in boys, but no boyfriends. But we'd have our own dances together, and we'd dance with each other. But when I look back, I think how bright every one of the kids were. So, when I left, I was the smartest in the class. The Japanese were the smartest in the class. I got to camp, and everybody practically was bright. And one day I said to one of the teachers, how come you gave them an A plus and I got an A? And I said, I studied with them. We passed the same grades and exams. And he said, well, did you give me these? And he had all these drawings that these two fellows did. They were terrific artists. I couldn't draw a straight line. And he said, this is why they got the A plus and you got the A. He was a Caucasian teacher. And he said to us, I will never desert you. I will be here until the last person leaves. And then while we were there, it was almost, towards the end of the book, he left. And so we said, well, Mr. Montgomery, do you know after the war, when I came back to California, I got this phone call and he says, this is your teacher, McGovern. I'd like to take you to lunch at the Fairmont Hotel. He came out because he knew that the people were coming out and many were coming back. And so he decided to leave first. And we said, well, he was going to live till the last stone was, but he came to help us out.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah.
And he helped many people get jobs. And he invited me to the Fairmont Hotel, which was the hotel, for lunch. And I wore my hat and I must have been 16 or something. And he really did. He did help us. And I understand he later went to Japan.
Oh, okay.
He went to Japan and he did marry an Asian person. So, but I still remember Mr. McGovern.
See, you guys must have made a good impact on him then. So, Mas, how about you?
Well, actually, I did have one really good friend. He lived in 9H. Up was 9E. We had to go up a few blocks, and he was my best friend. But when the mess hall bell rang, you had to run home to your own mess hall to eat. So it was. So I used to hang out both up in they were Livingston people. A fellow named Mac Miyake I used to hang out with, and then after lunch we hang out with the Calusa people pretty much. And there were a few people there, Hinokis and Yoshimuras, and the only big experience we had, there was nothing to do as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, not a whole lot to do. But we used to go rattlesnake hunting. And we used to bring back rattlesnakes, live rattlesnakes, and we give it to this man, and he would just love it. He would strip it right there and make soup, and he would give us a taste. But we used to do that once every couple of weeks, go rattlesnake hunting. But I got to thinking, when I was a father and I had a 10-year-old son, there was no way in the world I'd let him go rattlesnake hunting.
It's funny. My dad used to talk about the rattlesnake man because my grandfather, when he finally arrived at Amachi, used to catch. In fact, I forget. I was probably a late teenager, and my grandfather gave me some of the skins and rattles that he got from that. He had kept it all that time. My mom made me throw it away. But so also, we have another question here from Chris Tsujimi. Their parents were in 7E, 11A. It's Tsuji, Koki, and Toshiko. Do you remember them at all? Tsujimi?
What's the name?
What's the last name? Was Tsuji?
Tsujimi.
Tsujimi.
Yeah.
That's unusual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tsujimi. I don't remember that name at all either.
Okay. And then also another question. Strong Asian lead Grace and Joyce. It says, I have family members whose names were there: Shimono, Matsumoto, and Otani. Anybody in this panel recognize them at all?
Shimono? Otani?
Otani from Petaluma.
What were the names again?
Right there. Shimono Matsumoto.
Okay, it's I just got another. It's David Masami Moria. So, but
Shimono.
Grace and Joy. Grace Shimono. Oh, Grace Shimono. That name's familiar.
Yeah, but she was much younger though.
Yeah.
She just passed
Okay.
away. Yeah.
Oh, she just passed away?
She was a Nakano. She married a Shimono. She married.
Oh, then it's
yeah,
not
yeah,
the same
Okay.
person.
Yeah.
okay. Well, okay. So let's go on. And this next question I have actually relates to another audience question. My question was, what special things did you do with these friends of yours? And then the question from the audience that kind of relates to is, what were your most vivid or memorable times, good or bad? So, and I'm kind of tying it into the idea of the people that you were with. So, what was your most vivid or memorable times, good or bad, at Amachi?
Well, I went into camp at 12, came out at 16. So, but in that time, the girls would get together, have their own dances. We didn't invite the boys. We just the girls danced with the girls. And later we started getting interested in the boys. And then we'd invite just a group of fellas. And the other people would think, well, how come I wasn't invited? And we had to make a reservation at what they call rec hall. And each girl, we had two clubs. We had the wee teeners, WEE teeners, and then the juniorettes. And we would pick just the certain boys. And, it wasn't until later that I realized how terrible that was of us, because there were fellows in class and they were very bright. And we should have invited those fellows. But we had picked the ones we liked. And we thought, in later life, you take psych in college and how you might do something and had it, what happens that an individual feels discriminated against. We didn't think of that at all. We just picked the fellows we liked, and we just wrote a little invitation and sent it to them. And then we would reserve the rec hall, the recreation hall, and just certain fellows came to the dance. And I think back now, and I think about these fellows that never got invited, and that in my mind, I still remember.
Oh, so was a lot of what you remember about the dances? Is that one of your favorite?
Well, that was the only thing we had.
Okay.
They had a recreation hall, and then but then we had sports. But if you weren't terrifically, you weren't on a team,
Right? Yeah. But you didn't go like watch games or anything like that?
Yes, we had. I remember I was from Alameda, California, Northern California, but we had to move to the country in February. The war started in December, but by February we were ousted. And so we moved to the country thinking we would come back to Alameda. But so we ended up with the people in the rural area, and we went to Merced Assembly Center. And then when we went to Amache, Colorado, the city people from LA came, and they kind of looked down upon the people from Merced because they thought one area was all farmers and the others were LA people. And one girl said to me, "You're not like you're from the farm." She said to me, and we were, and all of us, but we had moved to the country.
Yeah.
Alameda, and there was another town in LA that had to move. We had to move in February. Alameda, another town in LA.
Okay.
So we scattered all over.
Uh-huh.
So they said in 10 camps, in every camp there was at least one family from Alameda, because we had to move before the camp.
There. Yeah.
Before the camp. But as they say, the teenagers, we were so stupid. We had fun. What I noticed, however, we were the brightest in school, grammar school when we were children.
Mm-hmm.
I got to class. Hey, A was not good enough. It had to be A plus.
Yeah, yeah. So Mas, how about you? What was like a special activities, special things, strongest memories, good or bad from camp?
A traumatic thing happened when I was in Merced Assembly Center. There was a fellow, and I think his name was I forget, Bob Swelka, and he was about, I was 9 in Assembly Center. He was about 15 or 16, and he took me under his wing, and we used to get the peach pits, and he used to show me how to make rings and things like that for my Cub Scout scarf, and we would steal bolts screws out of the toilet, and we'd make rings out of that, and our fingers would get green, that kind of stuff. But he was just a nice fellow. When we went to Amachi, then I lost track of him, but I used to see him every once in a while, and I think he lived in 7F or 7G or something like that. She moved away. But then during that time, we have a lot of people were volunteering for the Army, and they're having family feuds because the fathers were saying, why would you volunteer? They put us in camp, you're volunteering for the Army, that kind of thing. But Bob volunteered, and I think he was one of the very first to die overseas. And boy, that was really traumatic for me, because at that time I thought, gee, why are you volunteering,
Mm-hmm.
He was like, I didn't have a brother. He was like an older brother to me.
Oh, yeah. That's tough.
Really
Yeah. Yeah. So, Toto, how about you?
Memorable thing. Yeah, when you start talking about dances, I remember your father was a year older than me, so since we're in the same Boy Scout group together, they were the ones that used to throw dances with the girls in their class. The girls in my class were a little too young. 1 year made a lot of difference, 8th, 9th grade. Anyway, back then I was very shy. And I remember, when you have the last dance with a girl, you're supposed to walk her home. Well, I didn't know that.
So was she upset with you?
He's muted. He must have hit the mute button.
Oh, yeah. So Toto, did you hit the mute? Or did you freeze? Oh, he might have frozen. Oh, well. Anyhow, we'll go on to Lily right now. So Lily, how about you?
Well, we were too young to be invited to dances, like Toto was saying, it's that 1 year really made a difference. But one of the things I remember is the very first snowfall in Amache, because in LA, we of course didn't have snow, and these flakes would come down, and I remember.
I know.
What? He disappeared.
Yeah, we're just trying to unfreeze him right now. So go ahead, Lily.
So I remember going out and putting my.
For a while there.
Do you want to finish? And putting my hand out and watching.
Okay, we're having more technical difficulties right now because we've now lost Lily's audio.
Oh.
I'm
here.
Yeah, we could hear her.
So, is anybody out there can hear me on this panel?
Yes, we hear you.
We hear everybody.
I don't have audio on anybody right now.
You can't hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Anyhow, so right now we're having some issues on the feeds not working for some reason. So
We've lost Toto.
I don't know what to do without anybody to talk to. Oh, so can you guys hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, so for some reason I cannot hear myself, so I'm just going to keep talking and
we hear you
asking
talking.
questions. So, do you remember how you're? Oh, and so this one I'm going to.
Okay, so I guess I will pop in in John's place until he can get John. Just make sure you get your headset hooked up, and I'll go ahead and ask a couple audience questions while he's fixing his audio. So here's a question here from Joanne. Where did internees get money to last 3 to 4 years to buy items in town or from catalogs? Were there any paying jobs in camp?
No, you got paid.
Yeah.
$16. Yes, the doctors got either $18 or $19 a month, and other people who worked in the mess hall or as carpenters or whatever, there were jobs for anybody who worked, and they got $18 a month. Excuse me?
I thought it was 12.
I'm sorry?
I thought it was $12.
Well, I think the younger people, I remember we went to volunteer, we were still in school, and we got something like $9, and we thought it was wonderful.
Well, let me interrupt. I think it was 17. I had a job. I was paid $17 a month, and then you got a clothing allowance of $3 a month also. So my father was very impressed that I would bring home $20.
Well, that was way later. Everybody had left camp practically.
Well,
We were all
it was
gone.
towards the end of camp. But
Because you were only about how old?
I was 12. I was 13, 12,
Yes.
13, yeah.
What was
But-
your job?
I was a janitor in the high school.
He was 12 because we were all
No.
gone, most of
No,
us.
I was 13. 13 was 1945, yeah.
'Cause I was in Cleveland back then.
Lil, you
I'm
were,
back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doctors got $19. Doctors got $19.
now Lil, what was your maiden name?
Nakai.
Pardon me?
Nakai.
Nakai.
Hi.
And you were what? Were you 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, or 5, 6, and 7?
6, 5, 5, 6, and 7.
5, 6. I was 6, 7, and 8.
Uh-huh.
And Toto was 7, 8, and 9, right? So we're kind of consecutively, yeah.
Not same camp though, huh?
Yeah, same camp. Yeah, we're all in that.
Do you remember him?
What's that?
Well, I don't think she would. I don't remember her either.
I thought Amachi was a good camp. I mean, if you want to put it that
As
way.
far as camps go, yeah.
Because we got to go out to Granada. Do you remember that? It was like 3.5 miles away.
How did you get there?
And some people, at the beginning, we walked.
We had to be. We always walk.
No, later they had a bus that came in.
Oh, did they? I
Yes,
never got on
later,
the bus.
one of the trucks, I mean, from the camp. And they were done, so. But a lot of times it was 3.5 miles of when we walked.
Well, I remember catching a post office truck and going to Lamar, which was 17 miles.
Oh, yes.
That was really special.
Yeah. How'd you get back?
Well, we had to get another post office truck coming in.
Do you know why you went? Do you remember why you went to Lamar?
We went to see a movie. We went to see The Song of Bernadette.
Wow, we.
Well, I remember we got in a truck and we went down to, they had a state contest of glee clubs. And we went, about 99 of us. And then they put us on these trucks, you know, from camp, the green trucks. And then it was in Colorado. It took us, I don't know how many hours. We went there, we sang, and we came back, but we won number 1. Then the Denver Post wrote this horrible thing that the Japs used gas, that people were rationed, you know, outside, and they came down so many strong, and they won the so-and-so. A very bad thing. And then the music teacher said, "Don't feel badly. The editor of that paper's son and I used to be engaged, and I broke the engagement." And she said, "So don't feel that it's truly because of that." But I still remember that, and we won the Glee Club.
Oh, so
I remember going to Lamar. It was vivid too, because maybe 3 or 4 guys went, and we wanted to have ice cream soda. There was this drugstore there. And we went in there and we sat down, and I still remember praying that someone would wait on us. Please wait on us, please. And boy, I was so happy when that waitress came by and she said, "Yes, can I help you?" And we had our first ice cream soda we had, that we got.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Lamar, that's right. Wasn't that about 17 miles from Amachi?
I forgot how we got there, but I remember.
I think that was the closest town, yeah, next to Granada.
Yeah, Cookie, great memory. It is about 17 miles. So yeah.
There was, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I'm 92 years old. I still remember some things.
So, a couple of things that as a question that came up from Doug and Sheila Newland. Did you ever have overnight passes? Any of you ever? I mean, I imagine you young kids really wouldn't have, but
I think the adults could get passes to go out, but I don't think the kids did.
Well, if we could, you couldn't afford it anyway,
Your dad, Min, and my brother talked about sneaking out underneath the barbed wire and going to the Arkansas River.
Yeah, we used to do that too, yeah.
And there were snakes and stuff in that desert.
Well,
it was dangerous because there were snakes all over
they
the
didn't
place.
stay overnight, though.
yeah, right. And that's not really getting a pass either.
That's what I mean.
But my dad actually said that his Boy Scout troop, they actually went out to Mancos, Colorado, for a trip to get a bill. In fact, in the closing ceremony, he talks about that story. So there were certain events like that they did, but I imagine, for kids, it really wouldn't be something you do very often. Okay. So now, Lily, this one's, I'm going to talk a little bit about when you left Amachi. So you'd mentioned that your family went to Salt Lake City when you left. And did you leave early or did you leave when the camp closed?
We left when the camp closed.
Okay. And why did your family choose Salt Lake City?
Well, my uncle, before the war, worked for a company that had a boss who said, oh, let me go out and check places that we could move to from Los Angeles. And so he went all around and found Salt Lake City. And so my aunt and uncle moved to Salt Lake City. They were already here. And so they found us a small home. And we had a kind of guardian angel named Mr. and Mrs. Harrington. And they actually gave us enough money after the war to afford a down payment for this house. I mean, it was probably in the hundreds.
Wow.
At the time, and it was
Nice.
But this little 4-room house on the west side of Salt Lake City felt like a palace after one room. So I've always been here. For a long time, I considered myself a California girl, but I've been here since after the war, and so that's not true.
Yeah. So going back to when you first learned that, your parents told you, oh, we're going to be going to Salt Lake City. What did you think about? How did you feel about going there?
I was really excited, but the place to go was Chicago, right?
Mhm.
Everybody, that was the utopia of everybody to go there. And so there was a little bit of disappointment, but to go out of camp, that was pretty exciting. But it was also, I was nervous, after 4 years of not being in society, what could I expect to find there? And there was some apprehension.
So how did you feel when you actually arrived there?
Well, it was exciting. I mean, there were cars, there were street lights, there were buses, there were streets for one thing, and this was something I hadn't seen for 4 years. And the people were, before this was during the war. This was just after the war. And so in Salt Lake City, they had a rule that in order for an Oriental to move into a house, you had to ask the 4 people in front and side and back of you if it was okay for an Asian to move into that house.
Mm.
I don't know. I don't know if other cities had that rule, but they said it was okay. But then, this was a very poor section of Salt Lake City too. It wasn't. We were moving into a palace, and they said so they were all welcoming. They were all great with our moving in. And there was an Italian next door that raised chickens, and he would give us fresh eggs.
Wow. So actually, there's a question from Tab Uno. Said, wanted to hear my mom finish her winter experience that was interrupted. I never remember her talking to it about me.
Oh, the winter.
Yeah.
I remember the snowflakes coming down, and I would let a snowflake melt on my hand and think, this is incredible. This is really magic. And I still do that every so often when the first snow comes in. I mean, that it's a miracle. you have this white stuff coming down out of the sky, and I had never seen that as a California person.
Yeah.
I don't like it quite so much anymore.
It gets a little old in the winters now, huh?
I'd rather be somewhere else in the winter.
Okay. Yeah. So, Toto, you mentioned that your family moved to Seabrook Farms in 1945. And did you leave when the camp was closing, or did you leave earlier?
We left earlier. And when we got there, it was kind of disappointing because they were still setting up. There were people living there, but they lived in small apartments. And they, I think like duplexes. But when we got there, we had to live in barracks worse than the ones that were in camp. In fact, they had outhouses which we had to go to, So we lived there for a while. Then we moved into some apartments, and John Seabrook's, they had the biggest farm in the U.S. They used to supply the army, and they froze bird's eye product there. And as long as the parents worked in the factory over there, processing factory, we got to live there rent free, But my dad worked in the what they call the general store over there. The company had their own stores, which we had to buy food from. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, it was a very enjoyable period of my life living there.
Do you remember why how they chose to go to Seabrook?
Pardon?
Do you remember how or why they chose to go to Seabrook?
Oh yeah, mainly because my dad heard of a lot of shootings in California, and it's funny. The reason why we left there after 2 years, my dad's sister, my aunt, had cancer in LA. They lived in LA, and so my dad bought a car, and with a friend they drove 3 days and 3 nights, and they came over here. And he was working in a general store over there as a butcher, and he stayed with my aunt until she passed away. I mean, it was maybe like about a month. And then so when he went back there, the general manager of Seabrook's, he's a fat guy with a cigar, real cocky. He came back and he said, hey, Kay. He says, I thought maybe you died too.
Wow.
Dad really was up, and all his friends there, they heard that, and they started grumbling, and so my dad said, the hell with it, I'm going to leave, So one night I was playing outside, and this big limousine drives up, and then this chauffeur goes and he opens the door, and it was Mr. Seabrooks himself He says, does Mr. Kagawa live around here? I said, yeah, that's my dad. He's in the apartment there. So he went up there to see him, and he says he apologizes for that because he was scared that this guy was going to create a problem where a lot of people were going to leave, and Seabrooks wanted the Japanese there, because they were good workers. And so he says, I fired that guy. So if you can stay, I'd appreciate it. And my dad told him, no, I've already made up my mind, so thank you very much. So we packed up and we left in the car. Yeah.
So how did you feel about going back to California?
Pardon?
How did you feel about going back to California?
Well, yeah, it's the same feeling as you leave camp. You make friends there. But it's funny, like when we came back here, the best friends I had there and the best friends I had in Amachi, we used to see each other, and we all became real good friends. But,
Yeah, well, my dad went to Seabrook.
Oh,
He got a pass. Well, he went to work there, and he worked for about a week, and he said, this is worse than camp. I mean, he just hated it. And then a lot of people went out in that area from, your dad, I don't know if he went, but some of his friends went later to Seabrook and were chick sexers.
yeah, my dad didn't. So did your dad go before you went to Salt Lake City, or after, like from Salt Lake City to go out there? Okay.
Yeah, my dad was always out somewhere. He was hardly in camp. He just kept going out on apartment searching, house searching.
Always looking for the better place.
Looking for a better place.
Yeah.
He was in California for, on the other side of the 60 miles. Camp, but then later on they let them go on the coast anyway.
Yeah.
He was always out of camp.
Okay. Yeah. So Mas, do you know why your parents decided to go back to Alameda?
Well, I think that my father's intention were always to go back to Alameda, but a lot of people didn't have that opportunity. My father had friends, and they were in Rower, Arkansas, and they got, I don't know how they used to communicate where everybody was in touch with everybody, but the man over there, the Yamasaki family, told my father, Amachi's closing first, so when you go back, go to my house, and we have a house in the cottage in the back. It was from the World's Fair. The Japanese, he bought a big building. It was a Japanese pavilion, and he bought a part of it. And so we said, why don't you stay in there? We were in tatami mats and sliding doors with rice paper and all that good stuff. But so we were forced to go back. A lot of people wanted to go back to Alameda, but they didn't have a place to go to. Most of the Japanese could not own property, so the church opened up their hostel. They opened up the social halls, and they hung curtains. For 1 or 2 years, they lived behind curtains with your neighbor. And inside the chapel itself, upstairs, where the classrooms were, they were classes, and the Japanese school became a dormitory or places to live. So we were fortunate that we had friends who told us to come to live at their house. So that's why we went back, yeah. But I think my dad had all intentions of going back anyway.
Was there a big Japanese American community on Alameda?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, very large.
Okay.
Very large.
So it was really going back to comfort for him then.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. So Lily, in your biography, you talked about that you used to do stained glass, and that you found that it was, I guess, in a sense, restricting for you, that you couldn't work through the emotions as well, and you went to watercolor. What was that moment that you made that revelation?
In the late 80s, I started hearing stories about veterans in the Vietnam War coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I always wondered whether my free-floating anxiety was due to the 4 years in concentration camps. And so I experimented with trying to express my feelings. Well, first of all, I thought that if I expressed my feelings in art, that it would relieve all of this, you know, the free-floating anxiety. And so I tried some things in stained glass, and you can't do that because it's just too stiff of a medium. So I started watercoloring and painted. And as a matter of fact, I have a picture of my very first watercolor that I did. Can you see that? Let's see here.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
this is of camp and the towers, the guard towers and the lights
Oh, okay. Yeah. Uh-huh.
are red and oozing blood instead of lights. And then the bottom has skeletons because we were told that if we went out of the barracks after curfew, which was what, to 9, 10, that the guards could shoot us, you know, and at 10 years old, you kind of believe all of that. And so that was my very first painting that I did. And then I just kept painting. And
Okay. So were you a rambunctious kid? I mean, I want to know how, I imagine the Gasa Gasa Girl is a
Gasa
nickname.
Gasa, right.
Yeah. Was that a nickname given to you by your?
You all know what Gasa Gasa means?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Gasa Gasa. And so my mother would always say, oh, Gasa Gasa. So, calm down, calm down. And I would assume that if I were in elementary school today, that the teachers would be saying, get a doctor to prescribe Ritalin.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah, I couldn't sit still. And so that was what the train ride was really hard. And I found the winters at Amache were really bad because in LA we were outside all the time.
Oh.
And, you know, in Amache in the summertime, we were always outside. And, you know, what do you do in one barrack, in one room? And so, yeah, I was always going, always had to go, gasa gasa.
So those winters, who had it worse, you or your mom?
Well, of course, my mother also had her little group, right? Like your parents probably had their own little groups, and they would do hana, and I remember they're playing cards, and I don't think we did a lot together there. She taught me how to knit and how to crochet, and I read, but yeah, I don't know. It was hard on all of us.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you get your inspiration to write your book?
Well, I had a number of paintings, and those paintings got displayed at museums and libraries, and the curators would say, would you write a little paragraph to explain that painting? And so I started writing, and then I just found that one paragraph was not enough because each painting had a story to it. And so I would write the story for that painting and then put it away, but then realized fairly shortly that, you know, I had material for a book. And so then I added stories that my mother told me about her childhood, and that became the book.
Okay. So did the paintings inform the writing, or the writing informed the painting?
The paintings informed the writing. The paintings came first.
Okay.
And then the stories in my head came, and it's called a creative memoir because, of course, I couldn't remember all these little details like, you guys are relating. And so what I did was I pretended I was in camp with camera or a movie camera, and I went around in my mind taking movies and then relating those to the page.
Okay. So I've got some questions that I want to cover from the viewers. So from Doug and Sheila Newland, are your grandchildren, and I imagine also your children, carrying on your stories?
My son is sitting right here. Michael?
What?
Come on, Michael. Let's see. I have to be in front of camera. So do you. So, just the question was: Are you, kids or grandchildren carrying on your stories? And this.
We've been collaborating. Well, certainly, I hope so. I mean, I help in presentations about my mother's book and art, and we've actually been collaboratively working on a couple of art projects over the last few years that relate creatively to the sort of the Japanese American experience and identity, and
And as a matter of fact, we have
oh, this.
We have an art project here that I dedicated to Amachi, and this red crane right here, Amachi written on it, and we did this together and made the cranes.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a dedication to the camps, all the camps, and to Amache.
Okay.
And so this is one thing that we've been doing.
Uh-huh. So, anybody else in the panel want to answer that?
What is that?
Are your children or grandchildren carrying on your stories?
I didn't have any children, but
No.
I worked at UC Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
And they were floored. It amazed me how little that the people there, #1 public university in the country. And when they learned about, after I finished college, I got a job at UC Berkeley. And I worked there for 42 years, but it amazed me how little the people in the best public university in the world did not know what happened to the Japanese. It amazed me. And some of the older professors did come to me and say, all of a sudden, it seemed we couldn't tell a Japanese from a Chinese person, but only by the name. And that's when we realized something happened to the Japanese.
Mm.
But I was amazed that there was so little that people in California, at least the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, we all disappeared. And 3.5 years later, we came back. I went to college, and it was hard to get a job, but I got a job at UC Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they found out that I was in the concentration camp and whatever, and we didn't call it concentration. What did we call it? Relocation. And then some of the professors says, you weren't just merely relocated, you were imprisoned.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a prison camp. And, for the first time, I thought, that's right. The government's calling it something else to make it sound so good. But I worked at UC Berkeley for 42 years. And many of the professors did come and ask me about camp. And I was amazed that so little knew about what happened to the Japanese. In fact, somebody said to me that they saw Chinese people. And, they didn't think anything, they were either Chinese or Japanese, but there was not much publicity about the Japanese being evacuated from the entire West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And UC Berkeley, a top-notch #1 public university in the world, it amazed me. And the faculty used to come and talk to me about this.
They also made up for it because the Bancroft Library at Berkeley is really one of the best
Yes,
repositories of digital images now from the campus.
absolutely.
So, yeah,
The Bancroft
Yeah.
Library on
Yeah.
campus. Absolutely.
yeah.
Yes.
So in fact, I work at a museum, but I end up going to the Bancroft Library's website for getting a lot of imagery from the camps. So Hank, how about you? Or Toto, I don't know why.
You know, I have a granddaughter. In fact, this last semester, she's going to college, and they're studying about the camp. And so I bought them. I didn't know about Lily's book, but I bought them that book, Eagles of a Heart Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
I was online, and I know the people mentioned in there, like Babe Nomura and Yoichi Hosozawa or Shoshinaga. I knew them personally, so right away I bought it, and I bought one for my granddaughter. And so she's learning about what happened in the camps. And that's a very interesting story, in that the fella, I think this is the first book he's written.
Mm.
And he's really researched the history of the not only the Japanese but the Chinese, and he goes way back when they first came over here, and but found out the Chinese went through a heck of a lot. We think it's bad, but they went through.
Yeah. So now you got to buy Lily's book too. So we have another question from Chris Tsuji. What was the food like? And food seems to always been a very common topic for people in camp. How did you feel about it?
All I know is Santa Anita, you had to carry toilet paper around because everybody was getting diarrhea. We lived in the blue mess hall, and that was the first one. And what was the food was though? Oh,
Well, that's dishwashing. That's where the problem is, not the food. I don't think.
It wasn't that bad. Of course, we had a lot of what's that? Was it spam that they were serving us?
And that was tongue that we got in Merced.
Yeah.
We got tongue, but we couldn't believe we were looking at tongue.
Well, we didn't have doors on the bathroom, the toilets. Did you have doors? And so all the seats just had a partition.
Not the food.
And then you're facing each other. And, it amazed me, the politeness of the Japanese, that, you go into this and you look for the one that's empty. You just have a partition, and they bow to everybody before they find what's open. And we didn't have doors to close the toilets. But it's amazing to me that I look back how courteous the Japanese were under those circumstances. I remember the first camp, the assembly center we went to, they didn't have showers. They had one pull chain, and about 10 of us would, but we were too little to pull the chain. So an older person, they didn't want to come.
Yeah.
We were all 8, 9, and 10, but we couldn't reach it. So some older person would come and pull the chain, and there'd be about 10 or 12 of us under the shower.
So Cookie, though, was there a food that you liked there or hated there?
Boy, in the Merced Assembly Center, it was horrible. The food was just terrible. But when we went to Amache, Colorado, we found it much better because, for one thing, we had a lot of farm people, and then outside of camp, they did the farming and they grew vegetables. And so I would say in Amache, I wouldn't complain about the food at all.
Okay. And Lily, how about you?
Yeah, the farms really had vegetables, and we had the cow farm, the cows and the pigs, and the food wasn't bad. There wasn't, a lot of times there wasn't enough, and I remember that we always had a box of Ritz crackers and peanut butter and jam to tide us through. But you could buy those at the canteen. down there. And so, well, no, Santa Anita was really bad, like you say. And I think once we got to Amachi, it wasn't a source of complaint for me. I remember having my very first corn fritters. I had never eaten those. They were so good. And then they gave us squid. Do you remember those? Squid?
That's right.
In shoyu and sugar. And I love those. I thought they were really great. And so my friends wouldn't eat those because they had the tentacles still on and wiggling. So they give them to me. But no. I'm not complaining about the food.
Oh yeah.
Okay. We have about 8 minutes to go. So a couple other questions. Okay. Well, from Amy and Chelsea. Do you know why Chicago was so popular of a choice to go after the war? Lily, you mentioned that Chicago was popular. So.
That was the very sophisticated place to go. And New York seemed like too sophisticated for us, and that Chicago would be more accepting. And I think Naomi Hirahara has just written a book about going to Chicago. She's the mystery writer. No, you don't know. Anyway, she's from LA.
Camp.
And
Amachi people.
so everybody just wanted to go to Chicago. That was the destination because we didn't want to go. Well, I wanted to go back to California because I like the weather there. But a lot of people didn't want to go back to California because that's where they were discriminated against. And so that was the ultimate Chicago wonderful place to be.
Okay. And final question from the Newlands. Did you still have your hometown banks, and when were you able to use that money? Did you have to withdraw your money out of the banks, or were you able to keep in the banks?
They were just frozen.
It was frozen during the war,
Yeah.
Yeah. Did Dad get his money out?
Dad got some of it back,
Yeah.
but then he didn't get the others.
Okay.
Yeah, my father got some of it out before it froze, but I don't know that he got it. The rest of it, I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I imagine that's a little bit tougher for a kid to know what the family finances are about. Okay, well, we got to get going, but I want to thank you all for helping us out and participating in this pilgrimage. Despite the fact that I've heard a lot about camp from my dad. I've actually learned a lot about Amachi today, and it's been really enjoyable. It's been nice meeting Lily and Mas and Cookie and Hank. I've met before, and so thank you very much. And for our audience, I thank you for dealing with my technical issues, and I hope that you stick around for the rest of the programming for the pilgrimage. And just thank you very much, and goodbye.
That was fun. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Your
Bye-bye.
family lived in Beverly Hills. You know,
Yes, they-
9L. The only block by itself, they go to Beverly Hills.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
I can't